Chinese mega embassy in the British capital.
China is planning to move its embassy to a massive complex that would be Beijing's largest diplomatic facility in the world.
Now the government wants to give them a mega embassy on top of all the communication lines.
The White House is warning that putting a Chinese embassy near the city would be a national security risk.
Should Britain allow China to build a massive new mega embassy in London? That's the question for today's programme. Planning permission has been denied so far after numerous warnings, both in the UK and in the United States. However, Britain's Labour government may well give the embassy the green light anyway. Is that the right move?
To have something in the centre of the City of London with potentially access to all of the data pipelines that are coming out of it is a real risk.
It's kind of silly. Every nation has embassies, and their embassies are in their capital cities.
China has nuclear weapons pointed towards all of us. So it's something to consider. What is an ally and what is a hostile nation state?
More from them in just a moment, but first, let's look at the plans.
China wants to put its biggest embassy in Europe smack bang in the heart of London, on a 20,000 square metre plot that once housed the Royal Mint, where Britain produced its coins for centuries, included a 7-storey embassy house, a cultural exchange centre, and underground tunnels and rooms that have sparked speculation about exactly what they'll be used for.
The Standard says fury over plans for spy dungeons beneath the new Chinese embassy in London. Some people are satirizing it, calling it Walmart for espionage or a sci-fi villains HQ.
But so far, planning permission has been rejected. The local council cited security concerns, saying they're worried about possible large-scale protests outside. But for critics, this is really a spy story.
It is likely to become a base for their pan-European espionage activities.
And an issue of national security.
The US government and now the Dutch Parliament have expressed concerns about sensitive cables under the Royal Mint Court.
The embassy would sit above critical communication lines and fibre optic cables that connect the City of London and Canary Wharf, the world's second largest financial centre. It's also close to a British telecom exchange, raising fears about surveillance access. And it has line of sight to key landmarks, including the Gherkin, home to some of the city's top financial firms. The United States is among those worried that China could gain access to sensitive communications of perhaps its closest ally. US President Donald Trump has personally urged Prime Minister Keir Starmer to reject the embassy plans, while Chinese President Xi Jinping reportedly called Starmer directly to push for its approval.
Now, the Metropolitan Police actually objected to this redevelopment in December, saying that the area would not accommodate enough people, enough protesters safely. In January, however, that objection was mysteriously withdrawn.
With presidents from the world's two largest powers involved, the Labour government has taken control of the final decision and appears to be softening on the idea. It's now in a position to override the council and greenlight the plans itself. Ultimately, it's a choice: calm ally security fears or smooth relations with Beijing and unlock trade opportunities. In a twist of timing, Britain is still waiting for permission to rebuild its own embassy in Beijing. That site is near the city's central business district and Chaolai data centre and the Beijing World Financial Centre. So far, China has refused to grant the necessary permits for the British embassy. Could a geopolitical quid pro quo be in the works?
OK, let's get the view from all the main countries involved in that report now. And we have Philip Ingram, a former colonel in British military intelligence here in London. Nicholas Eftimiades is a former senior intelligence officer in the CIA. And finally, we have Einar Tangen, a political analyst based in Beijing. Welcome to the programme, everyone. Einar, I couldn't help but notice during that report you sort of scoffed and laughed and smirked. I guess you consider this all sort of scare tactics and a load of nonsense. Tell us why.
Well, I'm glad it's not been sensationalized. I was actually looking for a James Bond montage musical in the background. It's kind of silly. Quite frankly, every nation has embassies, and their embassies are in their capital cities, and their capital cities have lots of information around. This is just hype that's being put around. It is budget time after all, and MI5 and MI6 and everyone else is clamoring for more money. shouldn't just go to the military.
Ouch. Philip Ingram, what do you make of Einar dismissing those security concerns?
Well, the budget's been set and it's not going to be changed because of the Chinese embassy. We have to recognize, what China's principal requirement is when it comes to intelligence gathering. It's economic advantage. And to have something in the center of the City of London with potentially access to all of the data pipelines that are coming out of it, access to some of the signals that are coming out of the different buildings that are around, and the ability to intercept those because you've got a physical presence in the center of it, is a real risk.
So, Nicholas Eftimiades, physically, how would that happen?
Well, certainly there's a physical component of this, being able to physically tap into a cable. And that's fairly straightforward. The second part of this is collecting emanations. And you would collect emanations from, could be 5G networks in close proximity. You can collect emanations from satellites if you're within the cone of a satellite downlink. You can collect cross communications. So for this reason, the selection of embassies is actually a fairly, the location selection is actually a fairly complex problem. So, in this case, it seems that the Chinese have found something that's going to meet all their requirements.
I know the former head of the CIA, Leon Panetta, and the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, have both expressed their concerns about these cables and about the embassy. These are serious men. Why don't you take them seriously?
Well, you have two of the Five Eyes, the largest and most expansive spying entity in the entire universe, commenting in sync. I'm surprised. How could that possibly be? Now, I noticed that my compatriot there was talking very knowledgeably about exactly how you can get all this sensitive information. So I'm assuming that we know that this is something that has been done before, as in 2000, the Echelon case, I'm sure he'll remember that, a leak which exposed exactly what the CIA was doing in terms of mass surveillance, surveilling allies, etc. It was once again proven to be true by the Snowden leaks in 2013. So, so spying on your, let us say, your allies, not offline, so you can ask Merkel about that. So, yeah, I think there's a narrative part to this. Obviously,
I may interrupt for 1 second. I think what you're saying is the Five Eyes, those nations, would know all about spying because they do it. Well, the point is, Einar, they're all allies. Now, China isn't an ally, and you would not deny that China also spies. So naturally, Britain and the United States should be concerned, right?
Well, so should China. I mean, it was the U.S. and also Great Britain who both said that they're pouring most of their resources into spying on China. Both even went so far as to publish that they wanted Chinese-speaking people to come over to their side and provide intelligence. This has nothing to do with the placement of diplomatic services. Quite frankly, the U.S. has the largest embassy in China, in Beijing. They have all sorts of other places. The question is, do you want to have any kind of, other countries to have their diplomatic centers in yours? If you don't want them, then you just say, no, you can't have an embassy here.
So if I may summarize, Einar, everybody spies, including the Chinese, but the placement of the embassy shouldn't matter. I'll go back to Philip for one more point. The placement of the embassy shouldn't matter?
The placement of the embassy is essential. If you're trying to, from a hostile country's perspective, get into the best position where you can access what it is that you want to access, and from the Chinese, its economic data is their principal requirement, then somewhere in the City of London, somewhere where you can gain access to the communications pipelines, those fiber optic cables, and somewhere where you can gain access to the communications that are going on, meets all of your requirements. And therefore, that makes it much easier for them to achieve what they want to achieve.
Nicholas Eftimiades, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, well, first let me comment on the logic flow, if you will. the contention that everybody spies, so let's let the Chinese spy, is pretty absurd. China, U.S. doesn't have nuclear weapons pointed towards, towards any of our allies. China has nuclear weapons pointed towards all of us. So it's something to consider. What is an ally and what is a hostile nation state? So I'm sorry, that's number one. And the question that the UK faces is how much access do they want China to have to their commercial information primarily? How confident are they that China will not exploit that information for commercial gains? So, were I in the UK's position, I would actually be quite concerned. The reason everyone pushed back on China's 5G was specifically because of that.
Einar, just to round off this segment about spying, I'd like to mention a couple of examples in this country. Under the Official Secrets Act, there was a parliamentary researcher and one other man who was charged with spying for China, and that was in spring 2024. And of course, a couple of years before that, MI5 named Christine Lee as being engaged in political interference activities in relation to the Labour MP Barry Gardiner, who received £500,000 in donations from her. MI5 said that Lee acted covertly in coordination with the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party. Lee brought a case against MI5 and lost it. Einar, could you tell us what is the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party?
The United Front is an organization that's been around since the very beginning. It deals with propaganda, and it also is kind of protection of China from overseas and interior. They deal with any kind of what they perceive as threats. So I would say that it's more or less a propaganda arm. They cooperate as it is one country with every other department. But I must add one thing. When I hear this threats to economics, well, what threat does it mean when the U.S. is spying on Merkel's phone to learn her positions that are going to go into a tough trade negotiation? Is that a concern to Germany? Should it be a concern to Great Britain that the U.S. is using its own internal resources to spy for economic gain? So
Right.
it rings a little hollow. This is what I'm saying here, is that this is all hypocrisy.
Okay, we're done with the spying segment of this program now. Let's talk about protests. Both the protesters and the local residents have said, and the local sort of authorities have said, look, there are lots of protests around the Chinese embassy, maybe about zero COVID policy, perhaps about democracy in Hong Kong, and this site is not going to work for that. Because there's just too much congestion, it will cut off too much of the city. But there's another aspect of this, Einar. For example, the protests outside of the China consulate in Manchester in 2022. Now, you can see from these pictures that staff beat up protesters, including a gentleman called Bob Chan, dragged him into the grounds, beat him up, and finally released him. They act, it seems, with impunity.
Well, what happened was terrible, but you can't judge an entire nation by one person's actions. Otherwise, we'd be looking at Great Britain and America with very jaundiced eyes, based on the history and things like that.
Well, it's not just that. That is not a singular example. That is not a singular example. We do also have.
Give me another.
We do also have Hong Kong protesters at universities who say that they are terrified of being intimidated, threatened, and beaten by activists from the CCP. Well, no, I'm telling you, I want to bring examples of people in Britain being intimidated, beaten, and threatened by the CCP activists.
Well, yes, and then there's the activists who were being engaged in thuggery, and for a year were making it impossible for businesses to operate. They were closing down the streets. They were actively destroying businesses, anything that they assumed had any connection to people on the mainland, China. So this idea that somehow one isolated instance or two instances that you want to selectively put out, is this something that happens at every consulate in the Chinese consulate in the world? I mean, there have been protests outside Chinese consulates in many, many countries. In fact, there was a very violent one in Vietnam. You didn't hear about anything. So if a couple of hotheads did something wrong to a protester, well, that is not an example of exactly how everything happens.
Let's Nicholas have his opportunity to reply then. Nicholas,
Yeah, I'll just point out, we have the same thing in the United States. We have any activist protests that are done, in particular against Xi Jinping, are met with violence, and violence that publicly is tracked back to PRC employees. There's a lot of video. You can even see on YouTube video of Chinese consulate members directing violence against Falun Gong members. We have terrorist threats that are that trace back to the PRC against Shenyang and Falun Gong members all the time. So we see China taking a very, very active role against protesters, and quite literally a violent one, and that being directed by local embassy sources. So it's not uncommon here.
I just want to give the people of the area a chance to speak. Okay, so we've got some vox pops from people who live and work around the area, and then we're going to be hearing from the local residents association leader. So let's start with the voxes.
Do you think this is a good place to have the Chinese embassy?
Yeah, I don't think they should buy it.
They have bought it.
They've bought it already.
They're trying to develop it now, yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to develop it into an embassy.
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't agree with it. No, don't agree with it at all, mate.
Why not?
Well, they've got all these flats down here, the Chinese. They bought everything, mate. So, yeah, no, I don't agree with it at all. 100%, no.
Probably should be an embassy, but I don't know. Displacing people to do it's probably not a great idea.
I think it's a rather too prominent position for the Chinese embassy, particularly looking over something as iconic as the Tower of London. So, yeah, I mean, it would be great if this building could be redeveloped. It's been pretty neglected over the years, but I'm not sure that's the right use for it.
Well, they've got lots of bars and restaurants around here, isn't it? So I would say it's pretty good, very historical, very scenic. Yeah. So I would say, why not?
We don't know the Chinese Secret Service, right? Do we? I don't think we do. Maybe they might be creating something here to do whatever they have to do, spy or whatever. A lot of people tell me I shouldn't be using a Huawei phone and on a phone because it's Chinese and they're tracking the way that I'm going and things like that. So maybe that's what this will become. You never know.
I don't think that any embassy needs 5 acres of land, particularly in the middle of a large city, especially if the geopolitics are incredibly different from the city that they are occupying.
No, stick it to like West London, stay there.
Philip, you can hear from the people who live and work around the area. They're a bit worried about about their privacy and so on, security. What do you make of that?
Well, and they should be. China's got a principle of gathering as much information as they possibly can, storing it, and then planning to use it at some stage later if they need to. But they've got, again, targets that they're interested in. Chinese diaspora, groups that are anti-China, so the protesters that are around, will go into special databases so that China can assess them as a wider threat to getting its interests out, and then look at other intelligence gathering and other security measures against them at some stage in the future. And people who are moving in and out. Of course, we have to remember that over the last few years, there's been lots of stories about Chinese police stations popping up in different cities around the UK. They're really community centres, but some of the elements of those community centres actually have a policing function, and that's to monitor and to try and, on occasions, kidnap members of the diaspora. And we include the Uyghur population in this. And with London being such a cosmopolitan city, and the City of London being one of the more cosmopolitan areas, the threat is very large.
I just want to let Einar answer that one.
Well, I do understand. I was chairman of my city's Board of Zoning Appeals, so we dealt with these things all the time. The question I have in my mind is, where is the narrative? Where is this fear coming from? And I can quite clearly trace it back to my compatriots on this show. They're spreading this idea that somehow is terrible. What I would suggest to these people is they actually come to China and they see how it is to be able to walk around safely at night, never worry about anything, don't worry about your phone being stolen, etc. They'd understand that what the rhetoric and the reality are completely different. In terms of what's been happening, my goodness, the U.S. has interdicted people in Italy illegally, not even telling their local Italian allies that they're grabbing people off the street. I mean, this idea that it happens, I don't condone any untoward activity, but I'm not a country. And given that China feels very strongly, because Great Britain and America keep saying that they want to contain it, and they're using Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet, and the South China Seas to do it, yes, they're defensively putting up their antenna to see exactly what the opposition is up to, given that it's so aggressive.
Nicholas, Einar there making the point that at least people in China can enjoy the security they find on their streets. Any objections?
I think it's sort of absurd. It's, you know, the entire contention, first off, that China is that safe is ridiculous. It is not. They report statistics, and the statistics are always altered by the PRC. So they don't report honest statistics.
Philip, if you could just jump in for 1 second.
Yeah, the only people that can walk around China feeling safe at night are those that do not say anything against the Chinese government, that are more than happy that everything that they do, they transmit and all the rest of it, is accessible by the Chinese government. Any minority that is trying to operate in China is under constant surveillance and often under oppression. We just need to look at the Uyghur population. And then those from outside who try to go to China, I can't go because I know I wouldn't get out. Simple.
Okay, look, we're going to just...
You're a spy.
Wow. There you go. Einar said you're a spy.
Chinese spy went to your country. I mean, come on.
No, I'm not. I'm what they don't like even more, which is a journalist now.
Ah, journalist. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. You weren't a spy. I stand corrected. You're a journalist.
I used to be an intelligence officer. I'm now a journalist.
Yes. Well, I'm sure that's all behind you, because once you get out of the intelligence agency, they just say, oh, goodbye, good luck.
Okay. Well, slightly acrimonious, but let's move on. There's a certain gentleman who lives in the area, very, very close to the proposed mega embassy. He's the head of the local residents association, you might say, and he speaks for them. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
On a local level, we are concerned about our safety, security and privacy. When we go onto the estate later on, you'll see just how close they actually are. My own flat is 8.5 metres from the border for what will be the embassy. We are on Chinese land. We have spoken to them to find out what their plans were for us. They wouldn't engage properly. They just said it'll be dealt with when we kind of get the embassy in place. But once that's in place, we don't have any say. They can hide behind the Vienna Convention. So, yeah, our concerns is that where we've lived and bought, I lived here 26 years, we may find ourselves being forced out. Are we going to get paid off? Will we have enough money to move somewhere else in London? It makes a whole mess of my life. I work here, I've lived here for 26 years. You know, it is a concern about where I will be in 4 years' time if they get approval. We know there's lots of issues. We know that there's things in there that aren't right. So therefore we intend to keep fighting.
How many residents do you represent?
There's 100 flats on the estate, so it's about 200 people. Obviously, some people are renting out, but essentially we're representing all the people on our estate, because whatever goes on here will impact everybody. So,
setting a precedent, right?
Yeah. How many embassies do you know where people actually live on the land? Yeah, it's just such an unusual thing, and you talk to people, they don't actually understand just how much of a concern it is, or how unusual it is.
So, Philip, what do you make of his concerns?
Well, his concern is very real. You know, the Chinese will own the freehold so they can get an understanding of all of those that have got a direct physical view of the Chinese embassy, and where they could be used to spy on what's going on inside the Chinese embassy. But the other thing is China wants to get control of that. So if they don't detect people are a threat, their leases are probably safe and they can probably stay in their houses. If they do detect a threat, we will see evictions, and China will make sure that everything that surrounds their embassy is as secure as possible, because of course they don't want people to listen in to what they're listening into.
Okay, just a final question for all of you. We're going to take a look at your predictions, whether or not the British government, and it's in their hands now, people like Angela Rayner, Sir Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and so on. Do you think that they will grant the planning permission, Einar?
I think they will, but I think they need to take in local concerns and make sure that there's an understanding that the freeholds will be renewed.
Nicholas, the White House, Washington have objected. Do you think that they will get their way, or Beijing?
I sort of suspect it will be Beijing.
And why is that?
because there's an economic benefit that the Brits see. Their embassy is at risk. Their plans for new embassy is at risk, and I think they'll weigh their short-term economic advantages over their long-term security.
Yeah, Philip Ingram, is that your view as well? We know that Keir Starmer gave away the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. We know that Rachel Reeves was in Beijing in January, came back with a paltry £600 million investment over 5 years. It was a humiliation for her, but apparently the government is for it.
Well, I think the government will try and focus on what they can sell as a short-term economic gain. And we know that pathetic amount that Rachel Reeves came back was billed as something that was huge. It's not. And I fear they will ignore the Americans, our closest allies. They'll ignore the intelligence services that highlight the risk. They'll ignore the City of London, who will be quietly whispering in the background saying, please don't allow this to happen. And they'll try and do something that they can get one or two sound bites on the evening's headlines.
Philip Ingram, Nicholas Eftimiades, and Einar Tangen, thank you all very much. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.